Hello, hello, hello.
How are y'all doing?
Hello there. Okay, I see we're live. All right. Just a little bit of lag there, but it looks like we're live. Hello, good evening, everyone. Really happy to have you join us this evening. It is January 19th. Tomorrow is January 20th, a big day with the President-elect Biden and Vice President Harris inaugurated, as with our 46th president. So we are here tonight for our event the night before the inauguration, a special webinar hosted by Gallaudet University, President's Office, and the Center for Democracy in Deaf America, the CDDA. A non-partisan, apolitical organization established this last fall to enliven student debate and civic engagement. This event is also supported by the Daily Moth, of course, and SignVote. We have with us three distinguished panelists. So if you would, please introduce yourselves, starting with Leila.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leila Hanaumi. I'm here representing SignVote, as my t-shirt shows, as well as campaign by CSD, Communication Services for the Deaf, on making sure that elections and politics are more accessible for the deaf community by way of ASL.
Thank you. Lindsay, if you would. Hello there. My name is Lindsay Dunn. I was born in South Africa, but have lived most of my life here in the United States. And I teach in the Deaf Studies Department, and I am actually now divorced from my home department of ASL and am now officially under the School of Arts and Sciences. Okay. And I will try to present a view as much centered in Black lenses as possible.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Hi there.
David.
Hi there, my name is David Bahar. I work I used to work as a legislative assistant from 2004 to 2010. Since then, I've been working on policy in telecommunications, and I'm now in Maryland here with my kids, and very much looking forward to chatting with you all tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We're here tonight gathered to look at the impact of both the election and the events that have ensued since then, as we look forward to the Biden administration and considering the thoughts that we all bring to the table, both individually, as deaf people, as citizens of the United States. Also, just so everyone knows, on Facebook Live, you can comment and share comments and questions that will be archived and will be saved for the question and answer period we'll have at the end. We'll have somebody monitoring that Facebook live stream specifically for that. Okay, so also let me add that the last 15 minutes of our session, we're going to be joined by President Bobbi Cordano, who will share remarks, and we're very much looking forward to that. So we expect this panel discussion to last about 40 minutes. And the first question I'll ask is, looking at both the election and the Senate and the House of Representatives, how do you see the analysis and the breakdown of the results of the election back in November?
I'll respond to that first. The first thing is that I do feel a sense of responsibility first to address the facts. This election was replete with misinformation, misunderstandings, intentional misinformation that was being perpetrated. So that's one of the first duties of SignVote, is to make sure that accurate information is available in American Sign Language so that our community can be on the same page. Of course, Biden won the Electoral College and the popular vote. Yet, we have seen a great deal of claim that there had been voter fraud, despite the fact that 96 judges from varying political parties have refuted this. They have reviewed all of the evidence, and there is zero evidence of voter fraud. So I'd like to get that out of the way. Another thing I would like to point out is that we saw historic numbers of voter turnout. Trump did get more votes than he got in 2016. Biden, however, got the greatest number of votes of any president ever. So, right, that is remarkable. So that's the first thing that comes to mind, is that the numbers are rising. We see that difference between 2016 and 2020. I think this means that people are more politically active and politically interested than ever. You cannot ignore the effect of the pandemic. I think that that does play a major role in the fact that we're seeing how government operates, and the fact that how government operates really has an effect on our daily lives. I think that prior to the pandemic, politics was more abstract, especially on a national level. But with that, and then the response to Black Lives Matter activism, we are seeing that our nation is different than it was in 2016. And I think that that's what led to the historic numbers of voter turnout.
Okay, other comments, David?
Yeah, I think especially in regard to voter turnout, I agree with Leila. I mean, the record numbers of voters who turned out for this election is just astonishing. You're right that Trump did get more votes than he did in 2016. But for both parties, we saw overwhelming support at the polls for both Democrats and Republicans, people investing in this election. And that's something that we really need to take stock of, that in 2020, we really made a big difference toward getting Americans to the polls. It might be that they wanted to see change, and that they finally got involved in the democratic process in order to do that. I think things are different now for all of us compared to the ways that they were in the past. Too many of us stayed home. We didn't go to the polls. We just watched the news and thought that our lives wouldn't really change if we didn't participate in that process. But we're seeing that that's not true, right? That Americans, when they do participate, are making waves, and that we can finally get part of the political process back in our own hands, something that we really cherish as Americans. So I think that we're seeing a tidal change for people saying that from when they used to say that their votes didn't matter and would refrain from participating in the democratic process, to now where we're seeing people realize the power of the vote and taking advantage of it. So in the future, I think for the future of our country, I think that really bodes well, and I hope that momentum stays.
Well, I would say, just looking at what happened since then, my wife and I have both felt that same sense of discomfiture, that same sense. And that trauma that we have had as Black people, and knowing what would happen if we don't show up. And yes, he won. But still, for many of us, Black people have been discussing within Black circles and Black communities, Black forums, we have seen how people have wavered. After 4 years of this experience, though, with this president, it is absolutely clear that we cannot go through that again. We will not re-traumatize ourselves with this again. And so Biden was behind initially until he went to South Carolina. When he went to South Carolina, that's where we started to see him climbing into the polls. It was right after South Carolina We knew we could not ignore the fact that this election really got Black and brown people wide awake. We knew we absolutely had no choice. We had to do something. We could not depend on white people to do their part. 65% of white men and some 50% of white women voted for Trump. We cannot ignore that fact. Therefore, we BIPOC, we saved America. And I think that's important and deserves recognition. Now the question is, why did we feel so resoundingly strong about this point, to the point at which we would say, COVID be damned, I will show up and vote? You saw what happened with Black Lives Matter. You saw the burgeoning movement there. We saw the white supremacists. We saw the landscape and we knew we had to move forward. We had to make a difference. We understood that and we knew that. And remember, we're the only racial group in America that benefits from the Voting Rights Act. That was made to allow specifically Black people to vote. But we have to ask the question of why. Why would we ignore that? That makes our vote as important as any other, right? So it took an act of Congress to make that happen. So, oh, absolutely. You know, we don't have a world that is just. Not yet, no. And race has had a huge impact on this election. And we have to understand that moving forward, we have to act on that.
Thank you for that. This brings to mind what Joe Biden said about needing to about his decision to run for president, and that it largely had to do with the Centerville riots in 2017 and that demonstration by right-wing white supremacists and the counter-protesters, and the fact that a woman died who was there in counter-protest, yet Trump said that there were good people on both sides. So he tried to remain neutral, but in doing so, he revealed essentially that he approves of the actions and views of neo-Nazis, and that Biden said that was really a turning point in his decision to run for president. And it remained true until 2020. We saw that Trump's views on anti-racism and our new racial reckoning in the US, we see that he has a track record of not being supportive of it. Now, moving on to our second question. A hot topic now is around the Constitution and what the Constitution says about the transition of power and inaugurations. In its simplest terms, can any of you speak to that?
Well, I'll keep this brief. It does say that on January 20th, we get to say goodbye. I was saying that on January 20th, we say goodbye.
Correct. The Constitution does say that the president's term ends on January 20th.
At noon, in particular. Yep, so that's the time in which one president's term ends and the other ones begin. So that's when we will see Joe Biden take the oath of office, is tomorrow at noon.
I actually did some research in preparation for tonight's session because I wanted to do a little bit of my homework on the Constitution and couldn't find that exact answer, but did see that let me get the year right. I don't want to misquote things. But I remember that it pointed out that there was a hallmark of democracy is the peaceful transition of power, that really democracy is a social experiment. So this was an experiment to see whether, as a nation, people would accept a newly elected president because in years leading up to the passage of our Constitution, this was an unknown. Yet in the United States, we have been able to have peaceful transitions of power for over 200 years, and this really reflects the degree to which we believe in democracy. I also think it's worth looking to history that we had Nixon agree to a peaceful transition to power to Nixon to JFK, even though that was a contested election. And then Bush also conceded defeat in the hotly contested election between Gore and Bush. So we have examples of contested elections or hot elections, close elections, where there was still a peaceful transition of power.
So an experiment to see if people will accept losing and transition power. Okay, David?
Yeah, I just want to add to Leila's beautiful statements that the transition of power historically has been a peaceful process. Has not been a peaceful process, with the exception of this country, right? We've had 45 presidents. We've seen presidents refuse to go to their successors swearing in only a couple of times in the past. And when we go through the process of the legislature counting the votes, we haven't really seen objections to those either. So I think people were very much surprised at the speed of which donors and PACs shut off their donations to these folks who protested the count. They really clamped down on the idea that this peaceful transition of power should be disrupted. And so I think we are at least seeing that there is support from the general public for this continued peaceful transition.
Alex, your video froze momentarily. Could you restate your question?
So I was
certainly. I was asking.
I was
thanking everyone for their comments and was. I'll move on to the next question. What happens at the White House on Inauguration Day? What will the day look like tomorrow? Thoughts on that?
Well,
Dr. Dunn?
I live just a short 5 minutes from Gallaudet. That means pretty much in the center of all of this ruckus. Like Leila, Alex, and David, I think we're all pretty close to that, aren't we?
I'm not. I'm up in Maryland.
I went to Obama's inauguration, and that was a beautiful day. I got to see him there, get out of that car and ascend those stairs. That moment was so powerfully moving. And now, to see what this town looks like, militarized, with 25,000 soldiers around the city, it's freaked me out. In a way, it's very strange, 45 as a president was always obsessed with militarism and military decor, and how ironic that he should be ushered out with 25,000 guardsmen surrounding the city, seeing his way out. I think it's interesting. What an image. I don't think it's what he intended in his militarism, but I think it's symbolic. And I hope that regardless of the tension that we see and feel today, it's my hope that at some point all of us call to mind this moment. That it's not necessarily about party affiliation, that it's about our respect for democracy and our love for this country, our love for all of us, that we now accept that there is new leadership and that this leadership is not a dictatorship, it's democratic. The president and vice president represent not their party, but represent the country. All its citizens must benefit from their leadership. We have the expectation that they will serve all citizens, whether you were for them or not. We have to hope that all people will at least turn down the tenor, calm down. Let us understand that it is okay to disagree, but that we must work through that. The process has been verified. It has been ratified. We must accept the results. And we must remain vigilant. We have to. Democracy requires eternal vigilance. If we ever for a moment imagine that now that we live in a day with Biden and Kamala, that a magic wand has been waved and problems are solved, that cannot be thought to be true. Democracy requires opposing views. It requires a pro and con. It requires this. Just how can you know the truth if it is never challenged? How can you know how to define a thing if you never listen to what it may not be? It is our responsibility in this field of misinformation to critically think and examine information as we see it and question what is best for America. It may be the case that that is one of the hardest questions we'll face. But first, we must calm down. Tomorrow, we revisit our union, our understanding of what it means to be an American.
Thank you for that strong, powerful statement. David?
Yeah, about tomorrow, I'd like to touch on two different oaths of office. We had a very lightly attended event. The president came down. There wasn't much pomp and circumstance. It was pretty short. People don't remember that as being a huge inauguration, like in '08. The 2008 inauguration was completely different from any other that we had really seen before. People started lining up at 3, 4 a.m. In the morning. If you looked at the 395 bridge, there were people lined up for 3 or 4 hours trying to get access to the event. And the area in which people were standing was jam-packed of spectators. The night before that inauguration, President Obama was being hosted at the White House, which is tradition that the incoming president would be hosted there at Blair House. So the president would sleep at Blair House, and then the two presidents would meet for photographs, sit down, have lunch, and chit chat. Of course, that's not something that's happening this year, but it is cool to learn about that tradition. Tomorrow, we're not going to have that type of event. Tomorrow will be a very different occasion. There will be thousands of flags along the mall, 200 to 300,000 flags lining the United States mall in a beautiful symbol of what our nation is, but just in a very different way of celebrating the inauguration.
I agree. I'm always struck during this peaceful transition of power is that when the oath is taken and you see the outgoing and incoming presidents on stage with their spouses, and you see the outgoing president depart, get on Marine One, and leave. That is the most powerful moment for me in every transition of power. I wish that I could see that be the case this year, to see Donald Trump and Joe Biden stand on stage, put past differences aside, and let bygones be bygones. But we're not going to see that. I believe that Trump will be departing from a military base at 8:30 a.m., and he will go straight from there to Florida. Biden will go to St. Mark's Church, along with Senate Leader Mitch McConnell and House Representative Leader McCarthy. So you can see Republican leadership with the incoming president. I think that that departure of Trump, as early as it is, and refusal to participate is also speaks volumes. Another interesting tidbit, I'm sorry, I know you're about to say something, Leila. I just wanted to say something that the football with the nuclear codes, Trump currently has the numbers, but tomorrow at, let me get this number right, at exactly noon, when Trump's term ends, then at 12:01, Joe Biden will be in possession of this football with the nuclear codes. So I thought that was an interesting bit of trivia. Leila, what were you going to add? Yeah, I was just going to say that a couple of months ago, Deaf in Government, the Deaf Employee Interest Group, DIG, had a public panel. They had Leah Katz Hernandez on the panel, former ROTUS receptionist of the United States under Obama's second term. Prior to becoming ROTUS, she was still heavily engaged with the campaign and with the Obama administration, helping out in various capacities. Given that she had a campaign role, that's what led to her opportunity to be on the inaugural committee. And so at this DIG panel, she talked about that inaugural committee experience. And she said that the committee often stays at the, well, not at the White House, but in the area of the Capitol. She said they sleep at the Capitol right up to the inauguration because, as you were just saying, David, that you know, basically all the congestion leading up to getting to the area in '08 would make it impossible for inaugural event workers to get there. So they end up sleeping on the grounds in the area. And Leah was responsible for accessibility for that inauguration. Of course, there were a number of deaf people that attended. Dr. Dunn, you just mentioned going. David, you mentioned going. So Leah said that a number of deaf people that day posted on social media being there, wanting to find out where the interpreters were. And she said that that was the most rewarding experience, was to see the real life impact of her work on deaf citizens' ability to, or deaf people's ability to participate in the inauguration. I know that tomorrow will be inaugural and this will be different. I think inauguration events began yesterday with the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial tomorrow, and then there was a COVID memorial today, but the main one is at 8:30 Eastern time. And typically in Biden's administration, this is one thing I'm happy to see, is that Biden's administration is going to provide interpreters for every single inauguration event, and CDIs in particular. So I think that they're doing an amazing job with access, and I'm excited to share that before that main event at 8:30 at 7 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have a deaf inauguration event, so in place of a ball. So it will be a signed sense of community hosted by Deaf in Government, DIG, DPAN, and SignVote, sponsored by CSD. We'll be streaming this on the DPAN platform, and all of our hosts' Facebook pages will also feature it, so check it out. We've got a great lineup of people. The program is really exciting. We have a number of deaf people represented, so tune in.
Nice, nice. So the inauguration is a time of celebration for DC, and I know my first inauguration was when I was a Gallaudet student, and I was invited to George Washington University's inaugural ball, and it was a fantastic experience, networking and celebrating and meeting president and wife, and it's a grand affair. So tomorrow, given COVID, it's nice that the SignVote event by CSD is having that virtual inaugural ball.
Right, and this is a nationwide event for the deaf community at the inauguration. I think it's a historic thing.
Right, and there will be, in there will be interpreters actually in place physically there at a distance, but not somewhere else streamed, piped in. That's going to be there, and it's going to be very different with it all surrounded by soldiers protecting the entire event. But moving on to our next question. Over the next 2 years, Democrats will have control of both the House and then the Senate. Now, they've lost that Republicans before had, and the correction of the interpretation, the Democrats had a wider margin. They've lost a bit of that gap, but they're still in control, and they have now, just barely, because of the vote of the vice president being the tiebreaker, they have a 50-50 split now in the Senate, with Vice President Harris being the tiebreaker. So very close. And obviously the White House has gone Democratic with Joe Biden. What should we expect over the next 2 years? Should we expect rapid passage of a number of new laws, new focus of administration, or should we expect a very contentious time getting any bills passed? Are there high hopes for progress and change? Or are we expecting things to be more of the same? What are your thoughts on the upcoming 2 years?
If I could jump in, I mean, last time we had a Democratic-controlled supermajority, right? White House, Senate, and House of Representatives. I was actually working in the White House at the time, and it was pretty clear that there was going to be a very aggressive agenda to try to introduce bills and get them passed. And these were going to be progressive, agenda, like the healthcare reform, right?
Can you say a little more about that? What was that?
I'm sorry, the 21st Century Communication Video Accessibility Act. So this was a bill that was sort of the ADA for the 21st century, if you will. It was a very good bill. It gave us a lot of things like captioning on the internet. If you watch things like Netflix, or, well, that's a different story. But that sort of idea. The very first bill that was passed by the House of Representatives was a symbolic bill of sorts. We had just elected a female Speaker of the House for the first time in American history. And so that was a very special moment. And the first bill passed by the House was the Equal Pay for Women bill, the Lilly Gilbert Equal Pay bill. That really showed the House's commitment to adopt a progressive agenda for those 2 years. And I remember I don't remember the exact specifics of it, but it was lost 2 years later. This majority that we have now is smaller than the one that we did have at that time. So I think President Biden he's already announced immigration reform, and I'm sure he has other things on his agenda in the first 100 days. There are things that he can do through executive order, for example, tossing out or overturning some of the executive orders that President Trump had in place. But there will be some bills that need to go through the legislature in order to pass, especially those pertaining to COVID and economic recovery during this time. I know that there has been a large debate in the House as to what the future will be of additional reforms as they pertain to COVID and our economy. So, you know, we've had 4 different crises that are happening all at the same time in America, and there will be legislation that will try to address those being COVID, the economy, and 2 others. Biden named 4, but I don't know what the other 2 are.
The Paris Accords, right?
The racial reckoning.
Okay, so thanks for the help on that.
And racism. Maybe Leila, can you tell us a little more about what you see coming?
Just to follow up on the last comment, immigration and climate change were the other 2 crises. Alex?
So where do you see America going now that we have Democratic control of both the presidency, the Senate, and the House? Where do you see that going from here? Thoughts? Oh, who are you asking? Were you asking me?
Yes,
Ah,
Dr. Dunn, I was asking you.
okay, well, I don't know if there will be a big impact because it's really close. A 50-50 split, well, plus the Republicans narrowed the gap in the House. So, I mean, I don't have a problem with that because I believe it is important for us, for all of us, Senate, citizens, all of us, to have the legislature do their job. Legislating means negotiation, right? I think it's important to have that room for thinking and making decisions. What I expect is, regardless of the fact that Democrats are in control of all three bodies, Biden, well, everybody's going to have their own take on him. But I'll say he's experienced. He knows the Senate. He knows the people.
Yeah, he's got a lot of experience there.
He knows McConnell and Senator Harris. Well, Senator Harris is a senator, also well experienced, and is a woman who brings a critical perspective. And honestly, I would just say that personally, I was really hoping that the ticket would be both women. Just being honest there, I really was. Historically, men have had this opportunity year after year after year, resulting in exactly what we saw last Wednesday. That, to me, was earth-shattering. Absolute clarity right there. But okay, I accept it. But I'll say, having all three of those bodies, the House, the Senate, and the White House, will still mean they have to think out of the box. We cannot allow these players to throw America under the bus this way. We can't. We have to make sure that we exert the power that we have over this process. And if we do, then I think that will be important. It's important also that Republicans take a real hard look at their organization and say, what does the Republican Party stand for today? What is their vision of America? What is their agenda? I think that will be different now because they have to think about that future without Trump as the factor. They have to pivot and go back to what Republicanism stood for. My true hope is that whatever happens, that they bring the good in their party, that they create a positive kind of opposition, a kind of opposition that comes with dignity, a dignity that's been lacking these 4 years. So I hope that they will participate in the process and clean up their party. That's my true hope. I don't see that as a call for Democrats to just go pell-mell forward with an agenda and disregard them. I think we have to be cautious. And we are facing one of the most critical challenges, and one that they have to deal with most immediately is the fact that Republicans are going to have to learn the lessons of cooperation.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be something that we're going to need to look at and keep an eye on as we go forward. What is the Republican Party going to look like in the future with the absence of Trump in power? That's what I've been hearing a lot about, right? He had an iron fist of control over the party at the time, and with him gone, the party is going to need to rebuild and figure out what like an iron. He's had iron control over the party, right? Whatever Trump said happened for the last 4 years. No one would stand up to block him. He put out public policy on Twitter, and that's exactly what the Senate enacted. That's exactly what Congress enacted in response. So we're going to have to figure out what this party looks like without him in control. Right? They did this electoral college, standing up to try to block the votes in the electoral college per his campaign, per his plan. So the party, having lived under his shadow for 4 years, is now facing a crisis within itself, to realize that Trump is no longer its keeper, and that it's going to have to figure out a way to move forward so that it can stand with the Democrats in some way. And Kamala Harris, as as vice president, is going to be make history, right? So the next question here is what history is she making as this vice president, and what do you think that's going to look like?
Okay, so who's going to answer next? All right, I'm going to give you the most honest answer I can. I'm excited. I hope for 2 women. I got one in the ticket. That's fine. I'll live with it. But she is POC. And in the Black community, there have been really interesting discussions happening. Some surprisingly so. The issues of colorism are still at play. They're still happening in Black communities. There are still Black people who question her Blackness. Well, yes, she's Black. Regardless of any notions of a one-drop rule, she's Black. Her father is Jamaican, a Black man, and her mother is from the Tamil region, Tamil Nadu in southern India. She's a Brahmin, from the Brahmin caste, but people from that region in the southern area of India, near to Sri Lanka, those people are often marginalized by the rest of their country's communities. So that's not an issue really here. Come on. We have a vice president of color who has a fascinating family. She's married to a white man. She has a cousin who's married to a Latino. She has a cousin at the University of Maryland. Really already is linked into communities, Latinx communities, Asian communities, US communities, the island communities, African communities. She is there, she is present, and she is representing. And that representation is creating a sense of connection and community that is a thing of beauty. But for me, while that does matter, what is also so important is to be cautious of criticism and support. We know that we remember what happened with Hillary, right? Hillary was a very polarizing figure. People had very, very divisive opinions about her. Now, we have here someone who is POC, and we know from experience that people of color and women of color, when they are in elevated positions of authority, the expectations are often unreasonable. So we cannot burden her unrealistically. White people may not experience that kind of double burden. Any mistake she makes will be lambasted. They will use the fact that she is a woman against her, the fact that she is BIPOC. Those will all be things used against her, and we need to be mindful of that. I have faith in her strength, in her experience. Her experience in California is really going to help her. I'm telling you, watch out, watch for her. She's going to challenge big tech. And I think that's going to be important. She's authentic, she's strong, she's challenging, has intellectual prowess. We must come together to support her in her work for what's best for America. Personally, I am very excited. I just can't tell you. I've got 2 daughters and a granddaughter who see in her a symbol that says a message to my daughter, my granddaughter, that after Biden is sworn in and she is sworn in, we will be spending the 21st celebrating. As we celebrate that inauguration, that is a gift to her, a message to her that says, okay, you are a Black woman and you can still reach for a star and grab it. That is a symbol that's beautiful, and that America is a place where that can happen.
That's a beautiful comment, and I think it is true how impactful this is going to be, especially the layers of her identity in such a high role. It is going to begin a sea change in our country, as many think. Before we move on, do we have any other comments?
I would just like to reiterate that Dr. Dunn's message was powerful. And yes, of course, she is a first as a vice president. And then this is the first time in history that we'll have a first gentleman.
Yeah, you know, we have so many firsts. Pete Buttigieg is going to be the first openly gay or LGBTQ secretary. Yesterday morning, I believe it was, we heard that there was a first associate or assistant secretary who has been nominated, who is transgender. So we have so many firsts going on in this administration that it's going to be exciting to see how this, how the government, you know, as the 14th or 15th, as the 14th, to see it as the 14th or 15th with balanced government, gender-wise, at this point.
Right, like in Canada, once Trudeau took over, their parliament went to a balanced gender-wise. And so I think that was sort of the 17th country, or they're getting close to being the 17th country. So it looks like America is on the right track. Okay, so we do have one question from the audience, and then we will turn it over to remarks from President Cordano to close us out. So I'll give one question, and hopefully all three of you can respond in brief. So to paraphrase, the question from the audience is, our country is so divided right now. What will each of you do to work with people from the quote unquote other party? The person went on to say Gallaudet has students and faculty who are Republicans. They support the Republican Party, yet I don't see anyone on this panel representing Republicans. The person then says, I'm thrilled about tomorrow, but dialogue begins with inclusion. What are your plans to welcome and include Republicans as we move forward?
Well, I'm sorry that the panel was set without that in mind. It wasn't by design. I personally have many Republican friends, and I've taught many Republican students. Some who are like very profoundly attached to the NRA and Trump and so forth. We have to find ways to allow all of us to see other sides. I have to see their side and they have to see mine as much as possible too. In teaching my social justice courses with a focus on autism, especially when my classes are typically half deaf and half hearing, because so many of the interpreting department students are required to take that as part of their major. It means that we cannot completely disregard those Republicans and Trump voters because they are part of the country. They are part of Gallaudet. They're part of our body of Gallaudet. Now, I need to be able to understand your view and listen to your view. We need to be mutually respected. That doesn't mean I need to align with your view or agree with it. I think as we work to struggle with racism and privilege, there are people who will call us to just keep things as they are, keep the status quo as it is. And I think that is part of the struggle that we always are working against. We have to ask what's best for America, what's best for Gallaudet, what's best for our deaf community. To continue with nothing but rancor between us is not a way forward. We have to find some way forward. My best friend has always been a lifelong Republican. But now, and my state, as David told you, I'm from a state where our governor is Republican. And the county that I live in is majority Black. And yet we support our governor. We support him. He's a white man, a Republican. But we believe that he is doing a great job. That's the bottom line. Hogan's doing a good job. So are you serving the citizens who voted for you? Well, that's not enough. Don't stop there. It doesn't have to be that complicated. Where America is really facing an existential crisis. Well, one of my favorite writers, Noah Harari, you may be familiar with Yuval Noah Harris. Are you familiar? Harari, correction to the interpretation. Are you familiar with that writer? This writer is amazing. They warn us of the power of technology and misinformation. And what we see being done in America, the kind of harm that is being done to democracy by that, is important for all of us, Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, independents, centrists like me. We must recognize the factors that are harming our democracy. We must work together actively before we contribute to the collapse of this democratic experience. Uvalde says to us that it is possible. We don't want to believe it, but it is possible. We just have to remember the case of Rome. America is based on the Roman and Greek republics. These democratic citizenries with this intellectual caste, and the Republic of France founded on these same ideals. Remember the storming of the Bastille. There are so many historical examples of the falls of empire. We must tread carefully. We must hold our democracy gingerly. We cannot stand in hatred and opposition. There are Trumpists who pick individual over country. I got a problem with that, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican who's doing that. You cannot pick individual over country. I don't hate Republicans, I hate Trumpism. We cannot choose individuals over country.
David, would you like to make comments?
I would have to agree with Lindsay. I think it's important that we find common ground. In the last few years, I feel, unfortunately, that the willingness to do so has diminished. Maybe starting in 2010, so much changed when the Senate had the 60 vote majority, and they could filibuster anything out that they wanted. That was a turning point, I would say, a time in which rancor in the legislature was very common. There was no ethic to get together and work under the ideas of compromise that had been a long-standing tradition in Congress. I have to look at leadership. Mitch McConnell in particular has made comments for quite a number of years that he's working toward Republican beliefs and will push the Republican agenda. And so that I think that has been his MO, and we'll see what comes next. We'll see what will happen for the members, whether the members will look to disrupt, and if the rule of law will continue. I think I'll just end it there.
Leila, how do you plan to reach across the aisle?
My first thought is that really it ultimately starts with me as a person. I have to question and challenge my own beliefs to not be so locked into believing that I'm right. Any conversation that I approach, I need to be mindful of my own reaction when I'm disagreeing with someone. That I should, before I even respond, question whether I'm wrong, and to approach a conversation that is not fixated on rightness or wrongness, but really is focused on conversation.
Yeah, I've had a few discussions with some Republican friends. And when we look at what the law says and what the Constitution says, and we can see that Trump, or at least the party, did have the right to question the results of the election, right? But there were, but his role, Trump's role of himself, was not that. It was Congress's role to do that, right? So that's where, when we see how Republican ideologies affected the last 10 days of our country, and where we are now, and their misinformation about fraud, the lies that they spread about the election, we may start to think about whether that is really in the best interest of our country. We can debate things like immigration reform and taxes, and those are things that I think it's good that we have parties that disagree about once in a while. But we now can't erase our memories of what happened on January 6th, and I think that's That's an important thing to think about. Yeah, I think someone asked a wonderful question. Is bipartisanship normal? And I think if we look at things like the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act that passed in 1990, it passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. The CVA, right, the Communication and Video Access Act, that passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. So we have a history of bipartisanship in America that we can rely on, and that we would hope would continue, and that we can hope will come back. Because I think that has been part of our history. It just hasn't been part of our recent history. So we can hope for that.
Thank you for that. That concludes the time that we have with our panelists this evening. I'd like to thank all three of you for your participation. I'd like to thank the university and your respective organizations for their support this evening. Before we do close out tonight's session, I would like to offer the floor to to President Bobbi Cordano for her thoughts.
Thank you so much, and what a wonderful conversation. I thought you probably noticed in the chat, I was thinking that David may be the only person who did not graduate from Gallaudet. I had to ask that question. I found that to be the case, but I am so very proud of what you're representing this evening, representing our best and brightest in the deaf and signing community, and that commitment to democracy for our country and to one another and to the Gallaudet University community and to our deaf community. We have a nation that's looking for a new day tomorrow, a new president, a new vice president, and historical tickets seen there. Biden is the first white person to serve with a Black president and also a Black male president, I should add, and a female vice president who is a person of color. So this is a unique role he fills in the history of our nation. He, in fact, will represent for many of us what it means to be a supporter of people of color in our country. And let us not forget the power that each of us hold to transform and change what we see on a daily basis here in America, in this country. That's such a very important role. I want to thank you all for this conversation tonight. Lindsay, and by the way, I just have to note that Lindsay, now I've watched him, I think now a third day in a row, seeing you present in different capacities and different panels. He chooses clothing that's very symbolic, very intentional and careful in the selection for tonight, the sweatshirt that he's wearing with that particular logo. And I just absolutely love the care you take in representing and what you want people to know about you in this moment and what you're sharing with us through that symbolic wearing of that shirt. I also noticed another shirt, Leila, that you're wearing. I found one online and I ordered one for Mary and myself. And on election day, we stood there getting a picture of ourselves in our shirts right after we voted. So I want to thank you for just the delight I experienced watching you. And that's just the energy that you create in the community, encouraging people to vote, to get that deaf vote out. For your conversation tonight, it matters that we vote. It absolutely matters who shows up at the polls and votes. And it matters to see the power of what can happen when you show up to vote, that you can influence the elections in doing so. And we can't miss Lindsay mentioning and pointing out the fact that a vote for Biden and the win for Biden was a lot about a people of color who stepped up, who voted against what's been happening in our country over the 4 years and looked to create something differently. So we can't lose sight of the power that comes with our ability to vote, and that's made tomorrow possible. It's created a difference in leadership in our country as a result. I also recognize someone asked about, well, what about Republicans and what are we going to do about that? I also want to recognize, and Biden has mentioned himself, the fact that he sees his role as being one to really work to govern meaning that we govern all of the people in the country, not one particular party over another, but we govern all people. And I do think that this comment is not about Republicans or Democrats, about one party or another, but it's about the people that we see and what we haven't seen in our leadership that really reflects the whole of this country, something that's been missing. And what I would describe to you as an experience and a skill set that comes around that of governing. I think my biggest hope for this country and as we move forward is for all of us, for our young children and adults alike, to be able to see and experience something that's different. You know, Nelson Mandela often would say, and it's very interesting when people would ask him, you know, if you notice, Mandela would never, you know, people, what maybe didn't get people excited was not so much that he was charismatic in his remarks, but people always were looking to him for his reliability. He had a sense of reliability and of substance in whatever it was that he shared. And he truly believed that was more important to deliver those messages calmly, reliably, and providing substantial information. And when he didn't have to say anything at that time, when he did talk, he didn't. And unfortunately, what happens now is people are looking for the truth because they're desiring to find the facts, facts that are true, facts that are things that are in fact valid and are true. And maybe there's a different perspective on the same thing, but we do know what the truth is. We do know where the truth lies. And in fact, just in the last week, since January 6th, the understanding of what's happened on social media and finding that after all of those social media outlets were no longer available to many people who were talking about election fraud that we all know wasn't true. There's no evidence to support that. But without those social media platforms, the index, the percentage of people who believe lies on social media has dropped by 73%. 73%. So as a president of the university and someone who believes in education and the process of learning and the responsibility we hold as citizens of this country, we absolutely must also, as deaf signing community members, recommit to finding and discovering the truth, focusing on that truth, not in fabricating stories that serve our own personal interests. Truth must come back into our vocabulary. Because without truth, you can't have democracy. Without truth, you can't have negotiations where various perspectives are shared and various truths are understood. There may be different truths that are experienced by different individuals, but there are ways to portray that truth and that understanding that is accurate, more so than not. So we have to seek for the meaning and the truth and do so together, to explore what it means to lead and be committed to our collective well-being. You know, Ford in some of his writings, it was very interesting. I'm looking at some historical writings the other day about how democracy really challenges this notion of various interests and who's in control. Democracy is what ensures that voices of the people, as we saw displayed tonight on our panel, within our community as deaf people, as a language minority community that we represent, without the commitment to truth and the dialogue and negotiation and governing that comes with a democracy, we all in the end lose out. And all of the points that you shared tonight really spoke to that in a variety of different ways. It was just a beautiful discussion, so very thoughtful, heartfelt, and sharing various perspectives. I just was so inspired by what I saw this evening, bringing together our community and sharing information as we have, and sharing perspectives and thought and engaging in dialogue such as this was made possible because of you. So thank you, Alex, for facilitating this evening. Dr. Brendan Stern and his team, thank to all of you, to the News Center for Democracy and Deaf Studies in America. I would ask and call upon all of us to really begin this process and the work that lies ahead around our healing. And I want to remind you of something Lindsay said earlier. I live right here in DC. I rode my bike downtown right to the White House by the US Capitol just this last Sunday. And after Black Lives Matter this last summer, the White House was under siege. And so they put black fencing up that surrounded the perimeter of the White House from Constitutional Avenue all the way to U Street. And that siege mentality has now been expanded, which now includes the Supreme Court, that includes all of the buildings where they hold the offices of our legislators, our representatives in Congress. And it's been further expanded to include the mall right outside of the United States Union Station. So there's no traffic around Union Station. I mean, can you imagine Union Station with no traffic whatsoever? There's not a single car, not a single bus that's parked there at Union Station. It is
Right at that circle in front of Union Station.
It's a militarized zone. 15,000 soldiers behind these fences that are protecting this secured area. This is the image that I want us all to hold. We are better than this as a country. We are better than this as deaf signing community members. And as Leila said, rather, it starts with me. It starts with each one of us as individuals, having conversations with one another, regardless of political affiliations, regardless of people who choose to remain neutral. We have to believe in this country, and we have to believe in one another. We have to believe in the power of what we can become, which is stronger as we move forward together. And you've all called that for all of us in your messages and your comments tonight, and I join with you. I join with you in your passions and your desires to see us as a better nation for one another and for what we can be together. So I just want to express my deep appreciation to all of you and ask for the grace that we can share with one another as we navigate through the hard work that lies ahead with Biden and Harris at the helm as leaders. We want to experience the governing, but they cannot govern without our engagement, without our support. And, regardless again of the party that is in leadership, we have to be supportive and we have to be engaged in order for our country to be successful. There is no time like now to begin again, to try once again, and to restart. The way that you have shown us this evening in the beautiful conversations that you've had. So I can't thank you enough. Thank you to Brendan Stern and his team for hosting this evening. And thank you for everyone at Gallaudet who made this possible. And for all who have joined us to watch and to work with us this evening. Thank you all.
Wonderful.